Hi again. And continuing with the books about air marshals. And in the previous video, where we looked at the history of the Federal Air Marshal Service, I mentioned that we'd go into a little bit more detail about the early days. And I mentioned that in 1961, President Kennedy had made an announcement with regard to all the Cuban hijackings that there would be Border Patrol officers on the flights. In the event, a committee was formed, and the job actually was given to the FAA, and they formed a cadre of 18 FAA peace officers who were trained by the Border Patrol down in Texas. And they started deploying and covering certain flights. Now, there was only 18 of them, so the massive United States air network, it was a daunting task, but they operated for quite a while. And in 1969, the US Marshals Service stood up their own standalone program where they started covering certain flights as well on a geographical basis. So they had an input and an influence in the history. Then later on, there was an event which was very, very significant. It was the hijacking of several jet aircraft to Dawson's Field in Jordan. And 5 of them were blown up by the Palestinian terrorists. One of the flights they tried to hijack was one of the El Al flights, and there were air marshals aboard, and they defeated the attempt. So that was quite a wake-up call. So President Nixon this time called for a review of aviation security, and they revamped it, stood up a new force, and basically the FAA peace officers really started flying a lot of flights, but then their program tailed off while the new program was stood up under the auspices of the United States Customs Service. And they started a training program, and they started covering flights. And they recruited people from lots of different places, including the military. But they were the main bulwark of aviation security during this really intensive period where terrorism was targeting civil aviation. So we come on to the book which discusses this, and it's this book, Legends of a Sky Marshal by Jerald Worley. And Mr. Worley was recruited. He had a background. He did service in the National Guard, and then he applied to join US Customs and was accepted into the new training program. And he was sent to Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to the Treasury Air Security Officer School, TASOS. It was a 6-week program, which, looking back on it, was a very, very good program. It was very comprehensive and covered virtually everything you need for that task, and nothing really you didn't need. For example, they did a lot of firearms training, a lot of unarmed combat training, and they also looked at how aircraft operate, how the airlines operate, the procedures, what boarding and things like that, and how to blend in aboard the aircraft. But they also did a lot of scenario work, and they had an aircraft simulator. So they had to learn to access the weapons and fire between seats and passenger hostage targets and hit the bad guys. So it was pretty much the kind of training that was very task relevant. While they were standing up this very, very large force, unfortunately, a lot of the background screening was rushed, and some undesirable characters got through, and they would be dismissed from the course usually at night. The instructors would come into the room and wake them up and take them out and send them on the way. And the rest of the guys called this the midnight hook. And this happened after 9/11 too, when they did the massive stand-up of the air marshals. A lot of undesirables got through the initial screening there, and some of them actually ended up flying. So the instructors at TASOS were from Customs, from the Secret Service, what was then the White House Police, and from the FAA. And they put the guys through a really good program. They were then issued with creds, credentials which identified them as a customs security officer. They were issued with a Smith & Wesson Model 16 revolver loaded with Supervel ammo. And Supervel ammo was the magic ammo at the time, and it's arguably the best 38 special ammo you could have. And they were also issued with a blackjack, and they were allowed to carry a snub-nose revolver if they qualified with it. And a lot of the guys carried the snub-nose on the body and carried the 4-inch Smith 16 in a briefcase as hand luggage. Then Mr. Worley was sent to the New York office, and there they were flying mainly with Pan Am and also TWA, obviously airlines that don't exist anymore. And but they were the big major airlines flying the transatlantic routes and so on. And he started off, the airline people showed him and his colleagues around the aircraft that they'd be operating on, the 707s and the 747s mainly, and also the L-1011s and DC-10s, the big wide-body aircraft, and how they operated, where the systems were, the vulnerable points and so on. Pretty good briefing for the job. Then they went operational, and what they would do is they would attend the crew briefing with the captain, first officer, and the rest of the flight attendants and so on, the pursers, and they'd be introduced to the flight crew, and the captains would be able to brief them, and they'd be able to let the captains know what their duties were, the air marshal's duties were. So everyone was on the same page. Now, the air marshals have to blend in, but blending in back then was different to it is now. People used to dress up to fly, particularly in first class. So most of the guys would be wearing suits. So obviously the air marshals did as well. And nearly everyone flying back then drank. So particularly if you were in first class with complimentary drinks, if you didn't drink, it was stood out as a bit of a clue. So they had codes with the flight attendants, which they would emphasize at this pre-flight briefing, that they would ask for a certain drink, but they would only be served tonic water or cola or something like that. On the 747, there was usually a first class lounge, and people used to mingle up there. And obviously it was quite a sensitive point because it's the access to the flight decks up there. So it was a favourite place for the marshals to cover. So, but people used to chat and talk, so they had to have cover stories intact, and that was an aspect of the job as well. So dealing with foreign customs on arrival and this kind of thing was all explained in the book. And he also goes on to explain how a newspaper reporter, a TV reporter, revealed the seat allocations of the marshals, which was very irresponsible. And I never understand why the media do this kind of thing when they know it's sensitive information and there's no reason for people to know it. There's a kind of scoop mentality, I guess. So after that, quite often people would actually come up to them and greet them, knowing that who they were. So besides his own experiences, he interviewed a lot of his colleagues, particularly in later life, and got their stories as well. And makes it a really interesting read. It's quite a slim book, but it's full of quite interesting detail. And there's a picture on the back cover, which you can see. And it's the 50th anniversary. And the current directors of the Federal Air Marshal Service and brought in some of the old and the bold from the days of the customs and the days of the FAA peace officers to mark the occasion. So there's a good link back to that. So this is a good book to read in addition to the previous book on the history. So anyone interested in that, it's still available. It's been reprinted fairly recently, so you can get hold of it through Amazon. I'll put the link under this.